Hey everyone, welcome to Kentico Rocks, the podcast all about Kentico tips, tricks, and Microsoft.net's fun things. This is actually episode number 21, and hosted by myself, Brian McKeever. And I'm really excited because today I have with me a very good friend and close colleague of mine, Jeroen Furst from TrueLime. How are you doing?
Hey Brian, thanks for having me. I'm doing very well.
Good.
How about yourself?
I am sick. I'm not even going to sugarcoat it. It's been a crazy last couple of days, but I am getting over that sickness by the fact that I'm sitting in the same room as you for probably only a few number of times I can count on my hands. It's always a pleasure. I get to see you about once a year.
Yeah.
And it's amazing. So just so everyone knows, today's topic is going to be about Microsoft Azure and how you can leverage Azure to host different websites and applications. And, it just so happens that both myself and Jeroen, we deal a lot with Kentico and creating apps and sites in Azure. And we thought it'd be cool to share some of our knowledge around the subject, maybe talk about things that we're seeing that are new and exciting as developers who need to do this in our daily jobs. And maybe even give you guys some hints and some thoughts about, hey, I never thought about doing that in Azure. So, actually, I'll let you start. What's going on with you and your Azure work?
Yeah. Oh, thanks, Brian. Azure has been always an exciting platform, constantly evolving, constantly rolling out new features, and maybe in some ways it's similar as Kentico, which also brings out a lot of new features.
Right.
I see Kentico as a platform, Azure as a platform, like you mentioned, PaaS.
Yeah.
It's platform as a service, and we utilize that really a lot. Most of our projects are websites, so we can use the web applications in Azure. We start to deploy a lot via automation, and I think it's good to get some feedback on that and see how you do it as well.
And it's fine too because there's so many parts of Azure, it's kind of ridiculous, right? You mentioned it being a platform.
Yeah.
Our clients ask us all the time, like, well, how are we going to use Azure? What pieces? And sometimes that answer is, well, we're going to figure it out.
Yeah.
Because it feels like there's something new that you can do almost all the time. I mean, like you mentioned deployments, and that's when people aren't even sure, are we going to use a virtual machine? Are we going to use a platform as a service? Maybe there's things like deployment slots in there. There's things like another microservice altogether, like Azure Search. I'd love to hear how you're using Azure Search with your Kentico projects, because I know we're doing that, and I think you are too. But with all the different parts and pieces, sometimes I think it's hard to know that right recommendation on day one.
Yeah, right. Yeah, I think if I look back at the projects and the history and where we're currently at, it's pretty safe to say that we made some decisions in our architecture. For one, we use the blob storage for storing media files. We see that as a best practice because we want to keep that web application clean. And so every time we do a rollout, it's just application code, and we don't have to worry about files that exist on the server.
That's so important.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
And Kentico does a great job providing a blob storage provider, so you can pull that out of GitHub. It's even available for the latest version 12.
Yep.
So you can have a look if you haven't done that before.
So that's interesting because the last couple times we've done blob storage at BizStream, we've actually rolled our own storage provider because it's a simple class module you can add in. Yeah. But maybe tell me a little bit more about the one that's on GitHub.
Okay, that's good. And you're absolutely right with basically the initiation of the Azure storage provider is just a single class, and where you point out that you want to leverage Azure storage because that's not by default.
Right.
And then you say where it should be stored. But Kentico also provides this NuGet package, an Azure storage provider, and that adds a little bit more to the default. It also does some caching of the files. So the module, the media library, once you hit it, by default it will be acting a little bit slowish once you put in like hundreds of files, and they will need all to get pulled out of the Azure Blob Storage.
Right.
So Kentico did some optimization there, created a module to facilitate those edge cases where you have those large amount of files, and it will pick those files up, cache them, and then serve them once you request a module. So you don't have that that performance degradation.
Right. And actually, that's a best practice for all you listeners out there. Even the Kentico documentation will call out that you really don't want more than 100 items in a single spot in that storage container.
Yeah.
It's something that it's not necessarily a Kentico problem or not even really an Azure problem. It's the fact that there's so much transmission that has to happen back and forth for all that metadata of all those files. And that's actually why it's a little slow. But the benefits that you get from using that are great, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, the fact that you can deploy your application without worrying about where the content lives. You can leverage CDNs, for example.
Yes.
Especially with Azure, it's like a couple of clicks and you have it up and running.
Yep.
So those benefits outweigh the time that you need to spend in it. And initially, it's like installing a package, so it's pretty easy and straightforward.
Honestly, I think we both agree that it's a no-brainer that if you're going to do Kentico on Azure, you really want to do that storage provider customization.
Yeah, that's like the first thing on our list. Another topic is the search, because if I look at how typically a web application in Kentico looks like, you want to have some search out of the box, and Kentico provides two ways out of the box. You have the smart search based on Lucene, but you also have the built-in Azure Search, so it's pretty easy to set up. And again, I prefer to don't store my files on a web server, that happens with smart search. So after you change some content, you rebuild the index, those will be stored on the web application itself. And I prefer to not have that there in case of a new server spawning and your search could be down in those cases. So Azure Search is a little bit more mature than I would say Smart Search. So
that's one way to put it.
Yeah, it's constantly getting updates as well. You have a lot of power, also the AI capabilities, which are pretty interesting. So I like the fact that you have a search which you can also scale to your needs. And Azure Search for me is like the second thing that I consider a best practice, and we also by default roll out now.
Yeah, that's very cool. And I think people ask me all the time, like, well, wait a minute, why do I need a different search tool than the one that ships with Kentico? And I say, well, frankly, the one with Kentico is okay. It's not awesome. And you can get to awesome with Azure Search because of the dynamic facets.
Yeah.
I think that's a killer feature that we've done it in the past in our history. It took a lot of development effort to come up with, that like e-commerce experience of how many different categories and items of each category are on the sidebar of your page of your search results. Well, Azure just does that for you.
Yeah, and don't forget that writing that code, which is pretty doable, it will always cost performance. And in the case of large amounts of content, lots of facets, you want to be able to scale and set that up, and Azure Search provides that option. Yeah,
and it's amazing too, because I was skeptical at first. I thought it would actually be a little slower because you're calling out across a REST service to get your search results from an API.
It's lightning fast.
It's not. It's scarily fast. In fact, I hope that they don't try to take over what we have to do for our main jobs, because they did a really good job with it. Now, it does come with some cost, of course, because it's a Microsoft microservice. But I think, again, as we've said, that there's too much value and benefits to using it.
Yeah.
And actually, it may reduce some total cost of ownership over time because you're not maintaining your own search or worrying about what if the smart search locks up or has some issues. That any technology has issues. But really, we haven't seen too many with the Azure Search. It kind of works.
Yeah, I totally agree. And with that being said, we mentioned the blob storage before. Now the Azure Search, typically we have a web application, so we have a couple of resources we typically use in our projects. And the thing that we're now looking into are these Azure CLI commands. So we've looked in ARM templates, but now we're looking at the CLI because it's pretty easy, straightforward to just script the creation of all these resources out. And previously, we would always manually create all the resources, but now it's just running a script and flip, you have an environment up and running.
So then do you have that plugged into a DevOps pipeline then?
Oh, yes.
Okay.
Yeah. That's another benefit. Well, we at TrueLime are pretty much Microsoft focused and minded. So we use Azure DevOps, we use Azure, and it's nicely, you can easily connect it to each other. So having that scripts coming from Azure DevOps, so like what's it called? Infrastructure as a code, or
almost like a code first approach.
Code first
to
approach.
Infrastructure. Yeah.
That's something we leverage at this moment. Yeah.
And that's awesome because I feel like at Azure we're close to having all that automation, but you guys sound like you're a step ahead. That's congratulations. That's very cool.
Thank you. Now,
That's
I
very
think we all learn from each other. So,
Yeah.
That's nice about this week. We talked about some
Right.
other interesting topics.
Right. And little tease, the next episode of the podcast is going to talk a little bit about why Jeroen and I are in the same room together, but we don't want to give it away now.
Yeah.
But yeah, the other thing that, that deployment pipeline and using Azure CLI to do some things, you can actually, handle the fact that you might need to deploy your Kentico MVC code base, now that Kentico 12 is all MVC first.
Yeah.
But, in that scenario, you're setting up the resources. I'm curious, do you guys provision the admin tool in one web app, or Azure App Service, sorry, they renamed it, and then the live site in another Azure App Service, or do you do it in the same?
They share the app service plan, but it's basically two separate app services. What we also do, and that's also one amazing feature that Azure provides, is using deployment slots. Have you used that before?
We have. I love those things.
Yeah, right. Yeah, it's so easy because it avoids a downtime from a site. You can easily deploy your code, test it, and if it's all well, you just hit a button and you swap it out with production.
Yep.
And that's a major gain in quality, and our clients just love it.
Right. And when you do that, not only can you use deployment slots, you can use a scaling feature of Azure Apps as well. But if you do that, you have a few Kentico things to think about. You got to think about web farms, the situation for how that works, especially in the MVC world, and then maybe something to handle like session state. Do you guys have anything that handles session state?
Yeah. We typically would use the Redis cache for also a nice Azure feature. It's also possible to scale that out, so that's really cool. But I must admit, in some cases, we don't even use it.
Well, you're right, because if you have a static read-only marketing type website that just represents a brand and looks really great, it doesn't have login, doesn't have any need for it, you don't have to. But I would tell you guys, if you're going to do, your Kentico site and you have authentication and you have things you need to stuff in session, I really, really would encourage you guys to not do the old way, which would be like Microsoft SQL Server, session state management.
No.
I mean, you really can't do in proc at all because it falls apart because of the web farms and the load balancing that Azure does, and especially if you want to scale out.
Yeah.
So Azure Redis Cache is, again, something that's really cool is there's a NuGet package. You add it in, you provision your resource, you get your keys, put in your web config, and that's pretty much it. There's a great article on the DevNet site for how to configure Redis Cache with Kentico. Link will be in the bottom of this post. So, there's amazing things. Anything else, Jeroen, that, of all the different microservices or features of Azure that you use in your Kentico projects that we haven't mentioned, or have we kind of covered it?
Well, I would say that those are the most typical ones, yes. Maybe one, and that would be an Azure function, because, with the Azure Search, it not always it's not always that the out-of-the-box feature fulfills all. We've been looking into some synonyms, for example, and the Azure Search supports synonyms, but it supports it from a certain version. And good news to the audience is that Kentico has taken this feedback, and there will be a service pack released for version 12 this month, at the 26th of June, and it will actually update the Azure SDK, so we wouldn't have to create the Azure function to update and integrate the synonyms. That will be possible out of the box, so that's really good news for
I did not know that. That's cool. That's great that they're going to update the revision, because I know there's some other things that they've updated in the SDK version, which is great. That's why one more reason we're excited for the Kentico 12 Service Pack 1 coming out. I'd say for me, I think another thing we haven't really talked about is something I've learned recently, is that what if your Azure PaaS apps need to connect back to an on-premise resource, like a database or connection? My answer to that had historically been, there's different ways to do it. Maybe you have you turn on like a dedicated VPN connection to resources. Maybe use Azure API management as a layer. But what I learned is there's something called the Hybrid Connection Manager in Azure that you can actually enable in the networking tab of your Azure App Service. You say, I want to do hybrid connection. And what it does is it gives you a way to download this little fit client app that you can put on your on-premise server. You go do that. You install it on it. It's got to be at least Windows Server 2012, I believe. And I'll confirm that later. Yeah, pretty sure that's what it was. You then add in the keys that are on your networking blade of your portal for your resource, and then basically that little app is kind of like a really lightweight direct VPN connection to a single port on that machine.
Yeah, it's
so
amazing.
If you want to run your own API down on your network, you don't want to expose anything else. You want to make sure it's just that one thing.
Yes.
There's a way to do point-to-point connectivity now, so you don't have to maybe go through a. There's so many aspects of this.
Yeah.
That you can use.
It's good that you mention it. I think coming from a developer, Azure offers so many features that it's sometimes hard to oversee what they already have. And you mentioned Hybrid Connection Manager. We in one project we also utilized that, but this time it came from the IT department themselves.
Yeah.
And so we didn't even worry about how we would connect to their CRM, but because the CRM was living on premise, but they just helped us and provided this hybrid connection, which was existing, and the application could easily connect to that on-premise CRM system. So yeah, I think the hybrid connection manager is one of those features that, from a development point of view, does not get that much attention.
Right.
But it's so powerful, and so I would also consider that a best practice if you want to, connect the maybe some on-premise systems which you don't find the time to convert to an Azure microservice, for example.
Yep. It's a way to get your product done faster, out the door quicker.
Right.
All right, well, we're about out of time here. I want to thank you, my good friend, for joining me on the podcast today.
Thanks
Very
so
excited.
much.
Happy to have you. If anyone has questions for you, Jeroen, what's the best way to reach you?
I'm still around on Twitter. I would say grab me at Jeroen Furst. That's my Twitter handle. But you can always also mail me at jeroen.furst@truelime.nl. We'll put some info on the blog.
Yep, I'll get it on there too.
So.
All right. Well, thanks for listening, everyone. Go enjoy your day. I know Jeroen and I are going to go enjoy probably at least one Pivo.
Yes, Piva.
Piva. Thank you.
2 beers.
All right. Thanks, everyone.
Bye-bye.